Often in our renderings, we're asked to stylize the result, adding in a certain romance with a period or vintage feel, for example. I'm going to take that approach and stylize my daylight rendering of this house, borrowing from the work of Julius Schulman, one of the greatest architectural photographers of all time. I'll look at some reference of what it is we're trying to do. Here on modernsandiego.com, I'm looking in the Vincent R. Bonini page, and I'll scroll down to see photos of his work. Some of these photos are by other people, but down here at the bottom, Bonini House Number 1 is by Julius Schulman. We can see in here, in this Bonini Residence Number 1 from 1950, La Cañada, that the plants almost go white, that they're really, really hot against that dark shadow in the architecture, and it's really got a good range to it. Going over to the scoutmag.com in their architecture section, we can see another image, in this case a Julius Schulman image of Twin Palms, the Frank Sinatra house. Again, we're seeing bright white surfaces, deep shadows, and really glowingly white plants. Finally, in sinatrahouse.com in their vintage photos section, again we can see a lot of the same and similar photos. I'll scroll down and open up one looking at the outside. In this top left photo, we can see in here that, again, we're seeing this rich tonal range and bright plants, bright surfaces, and deep shadows. So I'll take this as my inspiration to stylize my image. When we look at other exteriors, we get the same kind of read, in this case more of the tonal range in the plants, but a really lovingly crafted the detail. Here in 3ds Max then, I'll take my scene and make it go black and white by pressing 8 to go into the environment dialog, and in the exposure, I'll take out the saturation, right-clicking on the spinner to zero it out. Now I'm going to burn the highs a little bit more, running it at 0.5, and deepen the shadows down to 0.4 as well. I'll leave my exposure, aperture, and shutter where they are, and this will get me an evocative black and white rendering, but I'm not done there yet because I'm going to push around the global illumination and final gather values. I'll press F10 and go into the render setup, and jumping into the global illumination tab, I'll scroll down to the final gathering section. I'll put my diffuse bounces to 4, which really gives the bounce light the possibility of bouncing between a lot of different surfaces. We're actually seeing some of that bounce right here, where the lower roof is next to the fascia for the upper one. It's almost got a glow to it, it's so hot, because the roof is white. I'm going to increase the multiplier on the final gather to 3, and then scroll down to my GI section. In global illumination, I'll turn on photon mapping, and again, push that multiplier up. I'll try a quick render and see how this looks, and see where else I need to push. This is really starting to work. That white roof is practically on fire, but we can still read the detail. I've got deep shadows and good range in the image, and that bounce light is just bouncing between all the surfaces, really giving it a luminous feel. Making it go black and white, of course, puts a stunning look on it, really focusing on the design and the way the light hits the planes in the architecture. Here's the last little trick. I'm going to actually color the plants, so instead of figuring out how to brighten them up so much that they look white, I'll just change their material. Remember, what we're after here is the cinematic. We want this to have that romance to it, and whatever we need to do to get there, we should. I'll press M to pull up my slate material editor, and in my scene materials, I'll double-click on the basic yucca. With the basic yucca selected, I'll zoom in, and we can see here I've got my Arc and Design materials in that plant. I'll double-click on it, or actually, go into one of those materials. I'll start out by double-clicking on the fronds, and I'm going to change their color to white. Then I'll do the same with the canopy. Again, double-clicking on it, and bringing that diffuse color up to white. Then I'll make the trunk just a little bit deeper gray, pulling out the saturation and darkening it down. I can do the same on that Society garlic, but I'll see how this looks in a quick test. I'll run a region render, clicking on my region and pulling it over to catch the right side yuccas. I'll hit render and see how it goes. It's working fairly nicely. The plants are much brighter, but I've got one more trick I'm going to pull. Right now, they're good, but they're not as bright as those original images. I'll go back in my material editor and into my materials one more time, and this is a special case for stylizing this image. I'll double-click on the fronds to make sure it's active here in the Material Parameter Editor, and I'll scroll up into the Self-Illumination section. In the Self-Illumination, I'll turn on the glow, and I'll let it go unitless initially and see how it looks to see if this brightens up those plants. I'll render that region one more time and see if I need to add more in here. Yes, we are actually making a plant that is luminous. That's okay because we're after the render. As long as it's not affecting the final gather, it's perfectly fine. It's almost working. I'll hit Escape, go back to Physical Units, and try it at 3000 and see how it looks. I'll render one more time and see if I get that bright quality on those plants. A little brightness goes a long way. My yuccas have that really bright quality in the leaves, but you can still see some of their shading. Overall, my image is, well, at least my homage to Julia Schulman. I'm bringing this to life in a vintage, period, stylized way, bringing across that romance of, for example, 1950s Palm Springs, when this was the new architecture out there, and I'm showing it in a stylized black and white.